Okay, hi everyone. This is Marcus here, David and Lisa. Thanks for joining this quick WebEx on the Humanitarian Program cycle. The objective of this session is to familiarize you with the new guidance that was developed and agreed here with global clusters, highlight some of the changes compared to last year, and provide an opportunity for questions. And we would like to encourage everyone to mute their microphones so the audio remains clear. Does anyone have problems hearing us right now? If so, please write so in the chat, or you can also flag your hand in the participants panel. Seems good so far. Please don't hesitate while we go through this session to write any questions into the chat panel. After the session, we can come back to your questions. Like this, you don't have to think about the question you want to ask and just note it down and it's there. That worked very well in some of our other sessions. We've got about 20 people joining. I'm just going to mute everyone who hasn't muted their microphone. Okay, good. Okay. Right. Okay, if somebody has a problem hearing us, please write it into the chat function. Okay, so the WebEx will run about 45 minutes, 60 minutes, depending on how much questions you have. A lot of this is all based on guidance you can find on humanitarianresponse.info. The link is here on the slide. You'll find guidance here in French and English for the HNO, the SRP, and the monitoring. The French for the monitoring will be coming in a few days, but it's all basically there. Now, I'm just checking here for somebody who might have problems hearing us. Seems good so far. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through the HNO for the next 10-15 minutes. Then David will walk you through the SRP elements, and then we have Lisa to talk about the strategic monitoring. We are going to focus on the guidance, on the templates, and mention some of the tools at hand to help you with this work. And basically, as mentioned, we are focusing on these three elements: the HNO, the SRP, and the periodic monitoring. Okay, seems everyone, the audio is functioning. For those who joined, if you have any questions that come up during the WebEx, please write them in the chat, and we'll then follow up directly after each session or at the end of the WebEx. Okay, so let me start with the HNO. So last year, some of you, I hope, saw last year's guidance, which was developed, based on practice from the field. However, this year, agencies requested that they be consulted on the guidance with the aim to simplify it and make it a little bit more practical. Already to say now, the changes are not that big compared to last year. What changed, at least in terms of HNO, is mainly the terminology in the template of the Humanitarian Needs Overview, and the guidance, so we hope, is a little bit more practical and concrete. To start, the HNO is much about the process. Of course, there's a product in the end, but the HNO is much about collaborating with your partners to reach a shared understanding. And the guidance lays out some tips how to design this process. And at the very end, we do hope to have good quality products, but really the main element here is the process around needs analysis. Right? There's some confusion out there, I noticed in the field and from partners. Some people think the HNO is an assessment. Yet it is not an assessment, it is not a primary data collection in the field. The HNO is built upon existing information, secondary data, right? It consolidates that information and we build our analysis on that. Okay, this just to give you some pointers up front. Maybe to quickly give you an overview, let's look at the template of the Humanitarian Needs Overview. We have here basically three elements: the key humanitarian issues, the impact of the crisis, and the information gap. Now last year, the key humanitarian issues were called priority needs. There was a lot of discussions here around priority needs. Is this terminology appropriate or not? What we actually saw that is that in HNO last year, teams struggled to formulate priority needs, and often what we ended up with are priority responses required, rather what we should be doing rather than describing what actually the key humanitarian issues for the affected population from the perspective of an affected population. That's what we're trying to go for here. So what the key humanitarian issues is basically a summary of what follows afterwards in the HNO. Then there's the second bit, impact of the crisis, which is very similar to last year. And basically there are three elements within that. It's the what, the where, and the how many and who. Basically, what are the drivers and the underlying factors? And you can see this all in the template, which is annotated, available on the website. We are asking which are the most affected areas, that's the geographic scope. And then very important, the humanitarian profile. How many people? What are the vulnerable groups? In the past, we saw that when CAPs were developed, or even last year for the SRPs, that this came at the very end of each process. At the end, everyone's ran and struggled to come to an agreed number of how many people affected. The guidance, we encourage to integrate that question from the start. It takes a process to come and agree on numbers, how many people affected. Each cluster has to do it. There's a separate discussion to come to an agreed overall number. It's not something mathematical. You can't just add these numbers up to one big figure. No, it takes a discussion, takes a joint analysis. So what the guidance really pushes here is to take this more seriously and to discuss with partners from the get-go around how many people are affected. And that, you will find, will trigger often actually good discussions and analysis that will help you further down the road. Within that, the humanitarian profile also, the guidance encourages to describe more granular, more detailed which groups are affected, either women or children or pastoralists or nomads, whatever that be, to help describe that human caseload. And then there's the third aspect, the status of the population in affected areas. This is where you'd usually find kind of more the sectoral analysis. And in the template, in the annotation, we listed a set of questions you can use to help report against these chapters. Questions that the partners should look at, and when they provide inputs, they have here several tips to follow, and a quite detailed guidance actually of what kind of substance analysis we would be looking for. And then thirdly, but actually very important, are the information gaps. Now often, as you know, we work in situation contexts where information is incomplete, data is messy, we don't have access to certain areas. So the overall information data often ends up being very patchy. Now the Humanitarian Needs Overview suggests to use this process to highlight, to identify and highlight these gaps, and to be very transparent about them, to put them in the document, and to use this to plan with partners for the following year to address some of these gaps. So in order to improve the analysis for the next year as we go along. So there's a separate chapter on that. And then one of the main differences to last year's guidance is that we put all aspects that pertain to the operational environment into an annex. This chapter looks at access constraints, is an opportunity to describe local and national capacities, the international capacities, all kinds of constraints that are actually part of the of the response analysis rather than actually the situation analysis. So that has been, partners wanted to annex this, and actually I think it's not a bad idea, because if you look at HNOs from last year, there was often a conflation of describing actually the problem driven by the emergencies and weaving into that problems that are related to our response, be that access problems or funding constraints, etc. And we want to have this clearly separated in order to capture really the picture of need without conflating it with analysis pertaining actually to our response, etc. So that is the structure of the HNO. Actually quite straightforward, so we hope. And the process the guidance suggests to work against, to help report against these elements is basically 4 steps. Also quite straightforward. The steps suggested are planning, then followed by data consolidation, joint analysis, and then using the findings. Now, we want to highlight here the first step in particular, the planning. This is actually really important. It can happen in a workshop or in a coordination meeting, but the planning is where you agree with partners, or where we agree with partners on roles and responsibilities. What questions are we actually trying to answer? This will help, target and shape the analysis. What information is available, etc. Here we would agree on timelines and when partners have to provide their inputs, etc. This is also, in this step, what the guidance suggests is to assign an analysis team. Now, we already got some feedback from the field that this is a bit confusing. What is this? What is this analysis team? Basically, what the guidance wants to suggest is a practical way of driving the analysis. That can be a small team of some cluster representatives or experts in certain sectors, led by OCHA, that drive it. If that doesn't work in your context, it might well be the intercluster coordination group that does this joint analysis, depending on how big and functional this group is. But the basic idea is, rather than having a too large a group working on analysis, driving this process, having a small team might speed up things, might make it more easy. But that's really to be adapted to your context. Usually this planning should be short, 1 day, 1 meeting, some bilateral consultations maybe before, but shouldn't take too long. What takes much longer time in developing an HNO is the phase of the data collection, consolidation, and identifying the information gaps. Now this normally happens under the leadership of OCHA, together with, there's a strong information management component in there, but it's not only the work of information management, right? It's really, we can't stress enough that it is teamwork between the HNOs and the IMOs. There should work collaboratively here on gathering the relevant information, structuring the information, so as such we can actually conduct a joint analysis. And in the guidance, you find some tips on page 4 and 5, how to structure that information. There's a list of a few tools, such as the Common Operational Data Set, the Humanitarian Profile Guidance, the Assessment Registry, etc., that give you a little bit of tools at hand to consolidate the data. And then step 4, the joint analysis. There are several ways to go about the joint analysis. There's no one way to do it. In the most simplest term, a joint analysis might be that this analysis team, OCHA, based on input from partners, develop a first draft, and then feed it back to the partners for their inputs and reviews, and then come together and discuss, finalize the draft, and discuss if people agree or not. That's the most simple way of doing it. If I want to create a little bit more buy-in and have partners engage in this process, we suggest to have a half-day workshop or day workshop where people come together, maybe work off the first draft, jointly identify what are the most pressing problems, how do they think it's going to develop over time. So we try to, in the guidance, put in some practical aspects to help you with this. And some of the main analysis considerations is really, that we would like to highlight, is really try to capture the problems from the perspective of the population. In the analysis, think about what the findings mean for the upcoming planning cycle. For example, apply in your structure clearly what is the situation now, and what's the projection, what's the estimation of how things are going to develop over the next year, and to be very clear and distinct in when writing up the analysis, so reader can understand what's the observation now and what sort of the projections for the future. So there are several bullet points. You'll find them on page 7 of the guidance that can help you with this. There's also, you'll find on the website, in the toolbox, some additional guidance to help you with that if you want to, for example, deepen the gender analysis. In fact, there's an annex of 3 pages to help with the gender analysis. Often what we saw in the past is that we get a lot of, we know often gender analysis is weak. We often get, told you have to include gender analysis, but rarely we actually got very practical advice on how to do it. So this time we hope we at least ask our gender experts to give us very practical advice on how to integrate gender in the analysis. And you'll find that in the annex of the guidance. So we hope that this is helpful. Voila. And then, of course, the analysis should help inform the strategic planning in the next step. Okay, I'm hearing that some people are struggling with the audio. Those, well, nobody's going to hear it, right? But those who have difficulties hearing well, we are recording this session and it will be shared tomorrow. So we hope we can catch those that have trouble listening in. I'm also going to write that in the chat in a bit. Right. So I'm not going to spend too much time. I'm not going to spend too much time on the HNO. We do hope it's straightforward enough. Again, the HNO is not an assessment. Rather, it's an analysis of existing data based on the services that are out there, be that smart surveys, integrated face classification for food security, market livelihood surveys, information you get from the clusters, but a big part is also going to be expert judgment. Particularly in the field, in the humanitarian field, often what we operate on is anecdotal evidence, expert judgment, and that needs to be captured. This needs to be documented, and if this is well done, you have already a good source of information that you can include in your analysis. There's also, I'm going to very briefly touch upon later on the vulnerability tool. We are going to have a separate WebEx on that, which is rather technical, and we need the IANs to participate in that, and that can help a little with the analysis. I won't go too much in detail. For this reason, I'm not going to go too much into detail on the vulnerability tool. That can help you with this. Okay. Right, so I'm actually going to wrap up the HNO part here. The tools, in addition to the guidance that we have, is the prioritization tool, the gender analysis, and the annex gender analysis. On the website, in the toolbox, you'll also find a little bit of advice how to integrate environmental analysis. We have a one-pager on the terminology around caseload. What are people affected, in need, reach, targeted? That's still guidance we took from the old dashboard guidance. We are working here with a few clusters on improving that guidance, making it more practical. but that probably won't be ready until, I don't know, a few weeks, probably too late at least for this cycle. There's also a link to the indicator registry, which is a list of agreed standardized indicators that can help you with this work. And as we go along, we're going to upload some presentations. We're planning on using actually this presentation here in PowerPoint form to upload that, so you can take that and quickly edit it for your needs. Should you need it for a coordination meeting or etc. And as we go along, we want to upload more. So I'm happy to take any questions here. Please write them in the chat. I'm happy to answer. And if not, we also have a chance to answer questions at the end of this session. Don't hesitate to write them to us. And at this point, I would give the presentation. I would hand over to David to talk a little bit about strategic response planning. All right. Hey, David.
Thank you. So let me continue now with 10 minutes on the strategic planning. So here also I will introduce by comparing a little bit to last year, and there is a number of changes but no fundamental change, because you may remember that the important changes were from 2 years ago to last year, where there was some serious changes that we went from CAP to SRP. So this year, nothing of the sort. We are still with the philosophy of the SRPs, the Strategic Response Plans, which are the documents that we will produce based on the needs assessment, and which will tell the strategy and the objective as essentially a tool by the humanitarian actors for the humanitarian actors. So the main goal of the document is a response management tool for country-based decision makers. So as you remember, that is a change since last year, because in the past, a CAP document was at the same time a document that was telling actors about what is our strategy, our common strategy, and our common goal. And at the same time, it was a document for the outside, for the government, for the donors, and it was a resource mobilization tool. Now, the focus is clearly that an SRP now is a response management tool, which means it is meant for telling humanitarian actors the agreed strategy that they are supposed to follow together. And that document may then also serve for resource mobilization, or it can be used to produce a separate document which is going to be more dedicated to resource mobilization. So support is also proposed by PSB to countries, but on a much more open mode, where we can find different specific solutions to different countries in terms of resource mobilization. So for now, let us talk about the SRP, which is the document about the response itself and not the document for the donors. So obviously, you understand that there are 3 steps that we are presenting here. So the joint needs analysis, as Marcus has explained, this phase now, which is the strategic planning, and that planning will be the base for the monitoring which will happen along the year. So when do we want an SRP to be produced? In countries having a protracted crisis, typically you are making a 1-year plan, and often it's a January to December, but nothing mandatory in there. Several countries are going multi-year planning, and also some countries are doing it not on a January to December base. So there is a certain liberty there to have countries see what is the calendar that best fits for them. And as you may know, Sahel is now producing SRPs at the end of February, because that better corresponds to some parameters of data collection. So the important is for a country to decide on its calendar when are we going to prepare the plan, when do we want the HNO ready, when do we want the SRP ready. Then in case of an emergency, the recommendation will be to have a PRP produced, which is a preliminary response plan, and it may even change name again in the future because there is some demand to call it the emergency response plan. But anyway, that first plan, which comes in the first days after an emergency, is meant to last for 30 days. So after 30 days, also it is expected an SRP, a strategic response plan, to be produced. Now, let us see, if I manage to go to the next slide, who are the main stakeholders and participants in the process of producing the SRP. It's all organized under the authority of the humanitarian coordinator in the country. It's going to invite the UN agencies and the non-governmental organizations, national and international, which are active in the country, some of them being also represented in the humanitarian country team. And then, of course, you will have the representatives of the cluster and therefore the intercluster, which gathers the heads of the different clusters. So these are the people that you invite anyway in the process, and depending on countries, you have a certain participation of government representatives and a certain participation of donors, and that is a little bit changing from one country to the other. Now, it is always a process that is facilitated by OCHA, and in order to do that, it is recommended that the OCHA country office identifies one person as the main driver of the process during that period of the year, which is the planning season, the moment where you are preparing the SRP. So the ideal is that one person is tasked with conducting the effort, which will go through a number of steps until the SRP document is out and online and terminated. So that person then will receive the support of PSB, which we are now in the process of contacting every country, identifying the person and setting the calendar. So we are offering remote support and field support because we have the possibility to have either the focal point of the country in PSB or some other facilitators who may come to assist in the process at different moments. However, the intention is not that those persons coming on visit actually run the process. They're not coming to do the job. They're coming to support on a job that is driven by somebody of the OCHA country team from the beginning until the end. So, how is it conducted? Well, we're going to only look at a number of aspects here, but there is more in the guidance and in the support you're going to have from your focal point. So, the fundamentals are that the country strategy must be defined first before you go into the cluster plan. Why insisting on that? Because it was a practice in a number of countries in past years to see what actors want to do, and then to put that into cluster plans, and then to get the cluster plans together, and that was now my country strategy, which would then always include about everything which is done in the country. Now, that is not much of a strategy because it's more of a consolidation of everything. So the intention here clearly is that there must be a high-level agreement on a country strategy expressed through a number of strategic objectives and a definition of how these objectives will be achieved. And that is the first step. So that process has to be prepared by OCHA and happen at the level of HCT and intercluster, so that you have the main lines of what you want to achieve in the country during that next cycle before you engage into the details of cluster objectives and cluster activities. So that's the first thing to insist on. Country strategy comes first and is going to be expressed through 3 to 5 strategic objectives. These objectives are going to be attached to indicators with targets, which will have to be measured. So that will be the base for the monitoring. The intention with the objectives is not to tell about what we want to do, but it's to tell about what we want to achieve. So it's expected that the objectives are telling how are things different for the affected people after the work has been done. So it's not about we want to act on this and that, but it's about what we want to achieve for the benefit of the population. So this being the phase one, to draft the country strategy, then phase two is to come at the level of the cluster and detail how the strategy will be implemented and how the clusters are going to develop their own plans, which they will coordinate with their cluster members along the year. So the clusters will be asked to state a number of cluster objectives, which will also be linked to indicators and targets, and then they will engage on the coordinated project planning, and I'll need to come back to that if probably there are some questions about coordinated project planning versus activity costing. For now, just remember, we have the country strategy with the strategic objectives, and then the cluster plan, and then a method of costing, which for most countries is based on actors registering projects with budget, and then vetting system by the clusters, and then the total of those vetted projects that provides the cluster budget. So that's still the classical way of going, and as you may know, there is an alternative way taken by some countries where the costing will not be based on projects but on activities. So anyway, at the end of the process, you have your two levels, the strategic level and the cluster objective level, and then the plan will also have the cluster activities, which are under the cluster objective, and with also indicators and targets. So once that work has been done at the level of the HPC for the country strategy, at the level of the clusters for their own strategies, OCHA has to bring it all together into a document, and that will become the SRP, and OCHA has to make sure that all the contributions are there in time and that it gets into a draft which is reviewed at field level, at headquarter level. There are changes brought. So there is a whole process of finalization of your document. Now here is a change also. In the past, there was an important step of the headquarter review of the document where headquarters had the possibility to do changes in the text and in the project because they had authorities at that stage of bringing those changes. That is now changed because there will still be a phase where headquarters are allowed to contribute, but the way of doing it is that headquarters will contact their counterparts in the field. So HCR in Geneva will be told, now is your time to look at the SRP of Myanmar, and if they have anything, they're going to contact HCR in Myanmar. So the process will still be owned until the end at field level by OCHA as the facilitator centralizing and by all contributing agencies in order to tell for the changes that they require. So in that sense, you can see here the finalization is essentially done in country. We are going to reduce the implication of OCHA and PSB at headquarter level and put it more as a support to the field, who is the master of the document until the end, but then with still some practical support in terms of style check, data check, format check, where PSB is still there to help. So that was a quick overview. There is, of course, much more which you find in the guidance, in the SRP guidance, and in the SRP template, which both also exist now in French. And on top of these two documents, you have a number of companion documents which are to be found on the HPC website. So just to repeat what Marcus was saying, go to the humanitarian response.info, find the part on HPC, and you will always have there the latest guidance documents and a number of companion documents that may help, including, for example, some PowerPoint like the one we're using now, which can be helpful for presentations, and a number of other things like what happened to the mid-year review, what has changed, how are the new recommendations now that there is no longer mid-year review. So many questions where you will find support in that site which has been recently revised. So I'll stop there for the planning. I'm happy to take written questions, which I will then answer after our third part is done, which will be on monitoring by Lisa.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to cover the third part, and this is the new part of the humanitarian program cycle, and it's on response monitoring. So as well on the website, there will be 2 guidance documents and 1 template. So there'll be a guidance on humanitarian response monitoring, and then there's a guidance document on the periodic monitoring report, along with the template. So what humanitarian response, what the guidance intends to do is it intends to clarify, or it looks to clarify what monitoring is, what response monitoring is, to lay out what the standard components of it are, and that making sure that everybody has a common understanding of the key concepts and the responsibilities associated with response monitoring. As I said, it's the third part in this series. So from the HNO to the SRP, it's the first part of response monitoring, the preparation of it, actually embedded in the strategic response plan. So do the next one. So this, I think, is all in the guidance document, so it's a lot of text there, but it just tells you that that it's a continuous process. It's not something that you just do once. It's something that happens throughout the program cycle. To look at the aid delivered to the affected population. So in attempt or its purpose is to provide an evidence base for making decisions about what action should be taken to redress shortcomings or fill gaps in the response, and to make ourselves accountable to the humanitarian community, to the governments, the donors, and then most importantly to the affected population. So response monitoring is a lot about reflecting on what commitments we have made in the SRP and have we delivered on those commitments? Have we done what we promised that we would do? So what it does is it intends to track the inputs and the outputs from the interventions. It looks at the outcomes of the cluster activities, and it measures the progress towards the objectives of the SRP. So it measures the objectives from the strategic level and also at the cluster objective level as well. I'm going to click right through these. So what response monitoring looks at, it focuses on, this is called the results chain, and it's used in programming. And what we're concerned with is we look at the inputs, but we also look at the outputs, the outcomes, and we don't really look at impact. So inputs are, it's the money, it's the staff, and it's the material resources. And for the most part, what we look at is we look at the money part. And our resource for that, our resource for looking at that resource is usually FTS. So everybody is probably familiar with FTS, but if not, it's FTS, I think it's .org. And that's where we'll track the money that comes in. The outputs are, so the activity is then the distribution of that, and the output is the delivery of the goods or services to the targeted population. So you see here one of our examples, the example we have is the water treatment kits that were delivered. And then at the outcome level, we have two kinds of outcomes. We have an intra-cluster outcome, which would require multiple outputs from one cluster. So that could be increased number of people who have access to safe drinking water, or we could have an inter-cluster outcome. And that, I always use the same one, which is a SAM or a GAM rate. So it does have a nutritional component to it, but also has a health and perhaps oftentimes a water component to it. So that's what we measure. We measure the financial, we look at the outputs, the delivery of goods or services, and then over time, what the collective outcome is of the humanitarian response. So to set the base for monitoring, we need to plan. And there are strong linkages, as I had said, for response monitoring in the SRP, and as such, it's done at the same time. So as you can see here, we've matched it up at each level. So when you're looking at project planning, it's making sure that organizations include in their indicators the indicators that were associated with the cluster objectives. It's making sure that at the cluster level that they have that they're setting the right output indicators and the outcome indicators along with the targets, the baselines and the targets, and then at the strategic level as well, when they're doing the country strategy and they're looking at the strategic objectives, that they're also looking at outcome level indicators along with their targets and baselines. Okay, so again, these are the three stages. I just talked about the first one. So we'll focus mainly on this one because this is the one that you'll be using in this, these next 3 months. So there's the preparation stage. There's when you actually do the monitoring, and then there's the monitoring of the results. But during the preparation stage, the clusters and the intercluster coordination group, they prepare their monitoring plans, and then that comes together into one overall arching monitoring framework. And this is done, again, alongside the strategic response planning. And at the end, what should happen at the preparation stage is there should be a document that you can call it, we've been calling it the Humanitarian Response Monitoring Framework document, but you can call it whatever you like. But it takes all of these responsibilities and puts them into an agreed upon document that is should be ultimately endorsed by the HCT. After that, throughout the year, what happens is that people continuously apply that monitoring framework. They monitor those indicators that they selected at the frequency that they said they would do. They come together, they look at the results of that monitoring data, and they make that information public for use in other reports. That takes you into the third step, which is the reporting step. So the results of the monitoring should be ideally made, public, the results of the indicators, and then they'll be used in a host of reports. They'll probably be used in the dashboard. It could be used in a humanitarian bulletin. Organizations and clusters will probably do their own cluster bulletins. But what OCHA would be responsible for is pulling together the periodic monitoring report. And you're probably all familiar with that one because that was sent out, I believe, by John in June or July and was put forth as an alternative to the mid-year review. So the results from the monitoring are a core part of this PMR, and that's what will be pulled together by OCHA using information from the clusters, but also pulling upon the analysis and the work of the intercluster group. Okay. So this is, again, just looking at the steps of organizing the monitoring framework. So the first one is the strategic objectives are drafted. The cluster then goes and makes their monitoring plans along with their cluster response plan. The strategic level indicators are selected. Like I said, these monitoring plans are brought together, put into a monitoring framework document. The HCT endorses it, and then the monitoring framework document is finalized. So the monitoring framework document, there's a sample of it in the annex of a sample template that you could use in the annex of the monitoring guidance. And all it is making sure that there are strong commitments to the indicators that are selected, that they're actually measuring the objectives, that it's feasible to monitor them, that the data requirements for them are outlined, who will collect the data, when they'll do it, and any resources necessary. That is all put out front so that you know along the year when you should be expecting this data and the quality that you should be expecting, any disaggregation. So there's a sample there in the annex. Take a look at it, and you can amend that in any way that you need to, but it kind of gives you an idea of the questions that you'll want to ask when you're making up this, this monitoring framework document and looking at the indicators and trying to keep those indicators as few as possible so that you don't end up with a mountain of them that you can't collect data on and analyze. So just in short, the monitoring framework, it's just a set of practices performed by all the humanitarian actors, and it facilitates the collection and analysis of the data on the humanitarian response. And it's for producing reports with these key findings, so analyzing those at scheduled intervals. And it's all to inform the clusters, the inter-cluster coordination group, and the HC and the HCT. So this is just kind of a summary of the information that is included, the content, I guess, of the periodic monitoring report. So the core of it, as I had said before, are the achievements to date. So it's from the beginning of it's cumulative. It's from the beginning of the year to the date that you're reporting on for the strategic objectives and the cluster objectives. And it also, in order to answer the question of have we done what we committed to do, and if not, why, and what should be done about it, that's the question that you want to answer in this report. You're going to have to draw upon some other information. And it's not asking you to go out and collect new information, but to pull upon existing and additional information. So the humanitarian context and any information on that, any needs analysis that is available, any information you have on the response capacity. You should have financial requirements from FTS. The cluster performance monitoring, that can be used as well. Any contingency preparedness or preparedness plans that you might be able to use to pull that together to look at the results and answer those questions. Did we do what we committed to do? And if not, why, and what should we do? And it's all to bring out the challenges in delivering response and to also come out with strong targeted recommendations to the HCT, prioritize on what they can do and to unblock any of these obstacles that we have to reaching our objectives. So the last slide in this is that this is just kind of a sample of the frequency of that reporting. And this sample reporting schedule, there's one again in the template for the monitoring framework that you can use to make your own schedule. But this should be done, you know, at the same time that you're doing the monitoring framework, so that you know along the year when you're going to release these reports. And again, it's agreed upon by the HCT so that they know through the year and they can rely upon these findings at certain points. And when key decisions would need to be made, or when it could also strengthen other reports. So this is just a summary of what's included in those two other documents. And if you have any questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. But also the documents are online, and then David and I are here for any questions you might have at all beyond this webinar. Thanks a lot, Betty.
All right. Okay, that was a lot of information in a little bit more than 45 minutes. You can either type some questions now. Please don't hesitate to write to us directly. Also, should questions come up later. For those who have difficulties following an audio, the recording will be made available tomorrow. So you can download it there and listen to it at your convenience. I'm not seeing any immediate questions in the chat. If you like, you can also unmute yourself and ask a question directly, no problem. But I think we might have overloaded you guys with so much information that no question seems to be around. Let's go to Yeah, nobody's jumping in. Well, no problem, guys. I mean, I hope this was helpful. To give you a quick overview, please consult the website, read the guidance for those who want to know a little bit more in detail, and don't hesitate to write to us. Unless there's nothing urgent now, we might as well stop here and not take any more of your time. Thanks to everyone for listening. We have more than 20 people on this WebEx, that's great. Yeah, I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks Lisa, thanks David, and we wish you guys a good rest of the day or good evening, and at your disposal should there be it.